Hey, I'm Beth Riley, and this is the Artist Spotlight podcast series. And today I have the pleasure of speaking to Todd Bradley. Todd, how are you?
I'm doing great, Beth. How are you today?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for talking to me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, give people a little bit of background on you and your music, how you got started in music in the first place.
Music's been around me ever since I can remember. My parents were both musicians. My father was a music teacher, and my mom was a singer who, sang with some bands around here. At one time, I think they had some, aspirations and dreams that changed when they started having kids. So they settled down, and my dad passed at a fairly young age. I was only 5, but I do have some memories of him. Our family kept the music going. My older siblings both played piano, so I heard them practicing all the time, and they would play for the relatives when they came over and get some applause, and I kind of wanted in on that. So I started piano lessons. I think I was 8. And then our school district offered instrumental lessons if you're going to be in the band. So I started taking drum lessons in 5th grade. I realized last year that I'd been playing drums for 50 years. My 4th grade teacher also would bring his guitar in to class, which made me want to play guitar. So we got a family guitar when I was about 10 also. So I've been playing drums and guitar about that long. And so I was always involved in school band. Our neighborhood had this Christmas band. We had so many kids at our neighborhood that the guy up the street, who was another music lover, had the idea to organize this Christmas band for the kids were all probably junior high and high school mostly, but some of the younger ones, whenever they started playing at 10 years old or whatever, and everyone was welcome. That was a nice experience too. And then my mom bought me a drum set when I was 13. Probably later that year, I was jamming with this kid that I knew from school who played guitar. Eventually, we formed a band called Hit and Run. When I was in that band, I thought for sure we were destined for the big time.
Yeah.
Things happen. There are a million bands that break up, It was something I had to learn, and, it was fun while it lasted. And played all through high school. I started playing in clubs and bars and stuff when I was probably 15. And the drinking age was 18 at the time in New York State here, so I was only a few years underage. There's a lot of good experiences through all that. After high school, I went to Berklee College of Music for a year and a half, and I dropped out because I figured I wasn't really studying. I was playing a lot of music and met a lot of great musicians. This one guy that used to hang out in my room was a friend of one of my roommates. Ended up playing drums on The Tonight Show for a long time, Jeff Tane Watts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then the band I played in outside of school, this guy who wrote music, his name was Harry Miller. We just played because, we wanted to play his tunes. And we played out in a few bars there in Boston, and that was a really good experience. I started in spring of 81, went that semester, and then fall, and then spring of 82. There were a lot of pretty well-known musicians, mostly jazz musicians when I was there. There was this kind of perceived friction between the jazzers and the rockers. It was traditionally a jazz school, so there was a lot of people there. There were a lot of people there to, study this traditional art form. And then there were these, a lot of guitar players. Berklee was known for, having tons of guitar players, which was good in a way because it, made you if you were there for guitar. I happened to be there for drums. Was my main instrument when I was there. Just the whole thing made you raise your game. It was quite an eye-opening experience because before that, I'd been playing in bands that were playing in bars for about 3 years by the time I went to school there. And, around Rochester here, I thought I was pretty good. But then you get to a school like that and there are people from all over the world that come there to really study seriously,
And they think they're really good too, probably.
Well, a lot of them are.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of them weren't right out of high school too,
Yeah.
which is another thing. I was 18 years old, So, and they were a little bit more ready to buckle down. And, it was still a great experience while I was there. And then I came home and started working in a record store. And the following year, the guy who had been the manager at the record store, who was in a band, asked me to join his band. They were called Roy Rebop. I should specify he asked me to audition for his band.
Got you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they had a pretty good following around Rochester. There was this one club, if you could draw a good crowd there, it was like the new wave punk rock club called Scorgies. It was a really cool setup, great stage and sound system, and the crowd was a lot of people from the city, and then a lot of suburban kids that would come in like wide-eyed like me. Like never seen anything like this before. But my first gig with them was at Scorgies, and the place was packed. That lasted about another year, I think, year and a half, something like that. Another great experience, playing in front of bigger crowds. And that was still the early 80s, so a lot more permissive times. Although some people, can't handle all that freedom.
Yeah, some go overboard.
Yeah, it's bound to happen.
Yeah. So who would you say some of your influences are?
I had been mostly into rock and roll since I was probably 6 or 7. I first heard the Beatles and, the Monkees. The Archies were on TV, The Jackson 5 had a cartoon. They were my early influences. The Partridge Family had a great show. Turned into something a little more serious. By the time I was probably 11 or 12, I was listening a lot to a local radio station here that played a lot of hard rock. It was still AM at that time. That was where I first heard Aerosmith. Before Walk This Way was a big hit, they would play stuff on there. I was into Aerosmith, and probably that was around the time I was playing, learning to play drum set. And that was something I could put the headphones on and play along with,
Yeah.
Or Kiss or something like that. In high school, I started to listen to more jazz. My older brother was really into a lot of jazz music. At one point, I just decided it was kind of cool, and it was a way for he and I to bond also, listening to music. The band I was in high school, the cover tunes we did were like Blondie and Talking Heads and a lot of, early new wave music, I guess they called it at the time. And we wrote our own songs. I wrote a few for that band. But then I would come home and listen to jazz. I would listen to Pat Metheny at home, and my bandmates would kind of give me a hard time about it at times. So I had kind of a foot in both camps, like when I was at Berklee too. So this whole rockers, jazzers thing, I think I have validly had a foot in both camps. So those were my influences up to that point. After playing in that band, Roy Rebop, I started playing in this band called Indirect Object, in which my two brothers were playing, and they needed a bass player, and I had never played bass, but I had experience playing guitar and drums, and bass guitar is really kind of a combination of the two. That was when I started playing. I think I was 20 years old at the time. I started playing with them, and that eventually turned into this band called The Essentials. So Greg Townson, my bandmate in the High Risers, he started Indirect Object with his friend Chris Sykowski when they were probably in 10th grade. When I joined with Greg and that band, and the kind of music they were playing was influenced by new wave music, but one thing, even at the time, Greg was easily the biggest James Brown fan I ever met. So he probably already had 40 James Brown albums. There was this store that was local that, you could buy them fairly cheaply at the time. You could get them for $0.25 or something. So a lot of their music was influenced by James Brown, and also ska music like the Specials. Greg had also been turned on to this band called NRBQ.
Yeah. His
babysitter when he was young was actually dating one of their roadies at one time, and she gave him, when he was probably in 8th grade or so, the record All Hopped Up. So NRBQ became a huge influence. We kind of tried to emulate them in a lot of ways in their approach to kind of, playing a lot of different styles, really, but having it all fit together in a way that was cohesive. He had seen the specials when they were on Saturday Night Live, so that was a big influence also. And they had a horn section. That was how my brothers were involved. My one brother, Mark, plays tenor saxophone. My older brother, Scott, plays the trumpet and also keyboards. And then I joined the band, so we did a lot of, rhythm and blues and country and whatever the heck we wanted to, kind of approach, like the Beatles did on the White Album, or, it's, a lot of different types of things. We had a great following in Rochester, and we were all in our early to mid-20s, and all our friends were the same age, and we developed a really good following here in Rochester. There were 2 different places where we would play once a month and pack the place every time, and that went on for, I want to say, at least 3 or 4 years into the early 90s. So that leads to my trip to Springfield, well, my first trip anyway. You're in Springfield, Missouri, correct?
We are in Joplin.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. We thought about moving there.
Yeah, it's nice. I've been to Joplin, too, when I was there in Springfield. So we had heard a record by Jonathan Richmond called Jonathan Goes Country. And that was recorded by Lou Whitney and D.Clinton Thompson from a band called the Skeletons, who were based in Springfield. They also had a band called the Morrells that their first album got glowing reviews in Rolling Stone magazine. That helped them a lot. They toured quite a bit because there weren't many places for them to play right in Springfield. And they actually gave a guy named Ben Vaughn one of his big breaks, his first breaks, by recording his songs.
Yeah, I played him a few times on my show. I like his stuff a lot.
Oh, Ben's great, yeah. And, he's been quite successful doing music for television. He did the music for that 70s show. He wrote the theme to Third Rock from the Sun. Anyway, I've been fortunate enough to play with him a few times, actually. The High Risers backed him up here in Rochester. Greg and I played here in Buffalo. Must have been, 3 or 4 years ago, I think, right before the pandemic. Ben is great to work with. Rehearsing in the basement with him is a show. He puts more than 100%, as much as that's possible. Every single note that comes out, it's a really an amazing experience. Super nice guy, too. So we recorded with Lou Whitney engineering and Lou Whitney and Donnie Thompson, D.Clinton Thompson, producing the record. By the time it came out, the band had become the Salamanders. When we tried to trademark the name The Essentials, it was already taken, so we came up with that name. And recording that record was quite a big influence on, how to approach recording. We'd never worked with anyone of that stature. Like I said, we had heard this Jonathan Richmond record called Jonathan Goes Country. He had recorded that there. Made us want to drive halfway across the country and record with these people. And we were really happy with the results. We had made demos of all these songs. We were sure that, with all these songs, we were just going to go and play them the way we played them on the demo. But some of the songs, they showed us how we kind of had to break them down and, play some of the rhythm parts a little differently so that things would fit together in a way that would make a little more sense. I think about all that stuff to this day when I'm recording. I can't stress enough how big an influence Lou Whitney and Donnie Thompson were on how I approach recording and also playing live. They had this band called the Skeletons, and we were lucky enough to do a show with them here in Rochester. I traveled to Joplin to see them live while we were there, and to see that band live was just incredible. And Lou had this in-between song stage banter that will never be duplicated. They have a couple live recordings that can be heard on CD. There's one that was a New Year's Eve, I think it was 1979 to 80, recorded live in Springfield. That's just incredible. But also recording with him, I remember laying down vocals. One thing, words of his that still ring in my ears to this day, he told me, Sing with authority. I can't remember which song it was we were doing, but it really helped me formulate an approach to, how I sing. You have to have some confidence, and you have to sing like it's the greatest thing that ever, that's happening at that time. So that record, The Salamanders, came out. We played together for another few years, and then that band broke up. And we didn't play. I didn't play with Greg for probably another year or year and a half. He was on the road with a guy from Rochester named John Ellison, who had a band in the late 60s, mid to late 60s, called the Soul Brothers Six. They had a record out called Some Kind of Wonderful, which John had written and eventually got covered by Grand Funk Railroad. Ended up being a huge hit. But John was... I've played with him a few times too, but at the time John was touring Europe, and Greg went with him to Europe for, I don't know, I think they were there for 3 months maybe. I was living in Buffalo at the time. My wife and I had been married for about a year and a half, and she had decided after we got married that she wanted to go to law school. So we moved to Buffalo for 3 years while she was doing that. I'd been living in Buffalo for about a year, maybe less than that. I was getting together with the drummer from the Salamanders, Chris Zykowski. We started playing out as a duo just because we wanted to. We missed playing out and hanging out together. It's camaraderie for sure, and being in a band. It's kind of like being in a gang almost, a team, of course. So Chris and I started playing out, and then Greg was back from his Europe tour, and he missed playing with us, and we started playing as a trio, and that was the start of the High Risers. Let's see, musical influences you would... I'm sorry to go back.
You're good.
It's so far away from your question about the musical influences.
Well, that's okay. It all ties in.
Yeah, I know. These tangents I go on are kind of all connected. But NRBQ is a big influence. We're also listening in the 80s to a lot of late 50s rockabilly, or mid to late 50s rockabilly, and early rock and roll music from late 50s, early 60s. Beatles, mostly early Beatles were what we would try to emulate, when we played. I mean, for one thing, even the Beatles didn't play their later records live, so,
There's something to that.
Yeah, exactly. But and it's hard to not be influenced by them, really. Any band during that era had to at least heard them and heard all these bands that were influenced by them. The Beach Boys were, surf music, Dick Dale. I was fortunate enough to see him here in Rochester back in the 90s when he put an album called Primal Thunder out. Yeah, I think it was around maybe 95, 96. And that was quite a show.
James met him before he passed away, but I didn't. I've heard a lot about him.
Oh, yeah. There's. I've heard some stories about him too. Quite a storied fellow. This guy that we started the High Risers in
97, 98.
97, 98. Yeah. Then in 2005, we went to Europe with this promoter from Belgium named Freddie Spoppen, and he took us pretty much all over Europe, from Italy to Norway, and mostly it was Germany, Austria, Italy, Switzerland area, surrounding the Alps kind of area. But we played France, we played Belgium. Yeah, he put us in front of some great audiences. All started up again, just as, I think my son had been born. My son was born in 96, and then my daughter was born in 99. That's kind of how I mark changes in my life also, where the kids came in.
Yeah, that helped sometimes.
They were a huge influence on my life, and after my wife graduated law school and started working as an attorney, I was stay-at-home dad, caregiver for my kids the whole time they were growing up. I consider myself really the luckiest guy in the world.
Yeah. It's always a good thing to be able to do that.
No, it was great, yeah. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And, kind of made touring with the band a bit challenging for a while. Couldn't go away for very long, but, for those Europe tours in 2005, we were very fortunate to have some friends. Michaela was still in preschool at the time, but she had a couple friends whose parents really stepped up and helped us. They would take her after school, and some other friends and family who would help out. we were able to make it happen. And then we ended up hooking up with Eddie Angel from Los Straitjackets. I'd seen Los Straitjackets here in Rochester. Greg and I went together. I talked to Eddie after the show, and I knew he had this record label called Spin Out Records. And the High Risers, our first record CD had already come out at that point, Panic, and we were in the process of recording the next one, and I asked him if he would want to, be interested in releasing it on Spin Out. And eventually it did come out on Spin Out, and we put quite a few records, CDs out on Spin Out. I can't remember exactly how many. I'd have to go see, but probably a half dozen, maybe, including the ones with Kaiser George, and we eventually recorded one with Eddie also. I would have to say 7 or 8. But after the first one came out, Eddie had given it to a promoter in Spain who brought us over to play at a festival called the Crossroads Festival. So that was our first trip to Spain, was for one show. I was gone for a week and on stage for probably 45 or 50 minutes.
Bound to happen.
Yeah, that was great. But that was a great experience. It was in a city called Gijón, in part of the country called Galicia, which is in the northwest. We played in the bullfighting ring there, the Plaza de Toros. It was great. The first night the headliner was Buddy Guy, and the second night the headliner were the Stray Cats, and there were probably each day maybe 7 or 8 bands, but that was great. And then we've eventually hooked up with some people, Bloody Mary Productions and this tour company called I Wanna Management, that booked us all over Spain, and we've been there probably over a dozen times. There were some years we went twice. I think the last time we were there was 2018. I'd really like to get back there sometime soon. The audiences there really love us for some reason. I had mentioned Eddie Angel, so our relationship with him led to, even before the Europe tour, we did a tour here in the U.S. and Canada, opening for Los Straitjackets. And that was one of their annual Christmas tours, in which they had the world-famous Pontani sisters dancing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
Yes. And Kaiser George from the band from Scotland called the Kaisers. Mm-hmm. George was the MC for the show, and he would sing a few songs also. That tour lasted, I think, 3 weeks. We played a few shows in Canada and in the U.S., mostly in the, I think we played Minneapolis was the farthest west we played, and then somewhere in Massachusetts is probably the farthest east. Anyway, that was a fun tour, and eventually, we were releasing records on Spin Out Records, Eddie's label, and then we recorded one with him. He decided that it's something he had been thinking about, I guess, for a while, that he wanted to record a record of all songs that the Beatles would perform a lot before they started writing on their own, like cover songs that they would do. That eventually came out as Eddie Angel Meets the Beatles with the High Risers, and we toured around and promoted that and had some great shows. And we're also able to do shows with, Eddie has a band besides Los Straitjackets called the Neanderthals. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Yeah, absolutely. James is a huge Eddie Angel fan.
Yeah, and so the Neanderthals, he and a guy named Johnny Rabb wrote all these songs and formed the band. And they would do tours where Jason and I, the drummer, Jason Smay and I, he's the drummer from the High Risers, we would play the High Risers set, and then we would back them up as the Neanderthals. And we got to do that tour in the Midwest in the U.S., like Midwest in the Northeast, and then we took that to Spain also. And also with Freddie Spoppin, so we took that all over Europe too.
You mentioned Jason Smay. I got to talk about that for a minute because it's my birthday month, buddy.
Yeah, okay.
His birthday is the day before mine, so.
Okay, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention, when Jason joined, I should go back, and after Chris Sikowski left, we had a guy named Jim Symonds as our drummer, and he was on the first 2 CDs, and we played with him for about 3 years, I think, 2 or 3 years, and yeah, it was a great experience. And then Jason joined, And when he joined, he had bigger plans than we had previously for the High Risers. And we were just thinking it was like, we weren't really planning on touring that much. But then Jason joined, and we had met Eddie already at that point. Jason and Eddie really hit it off. And of course, Jason eventually joined Low Straitjackets. But when Jason joined the High Risers, it really led us to doing so much more than we had ever thought. Ended up touring, going to Europe, and all this stuff probably, might not have happened if it hadn't been for his ambition and drive, which really was an impetus for us going.
I finally met him and his son McKinley, who Jason plays for now. We had been talking for a couple of years, and finally I met him. James had met him several times, and he went with too. So
yeah, well, McKinley I've known, probably since he was born.
Yeah.
I've had the good fortune of playing with him also a few times. The first time he was probably 12 years old or so. Mm-hmm. There are photos of that somewhere on my Facebook page. 12-year-old McKinley James. But they're doing quite well. They were just over in Europe, I believe.
Yeah, they were leaving like the next day, I think next day or two after we met them in Kansas City. So,
okay.
Yeah, they were getting ready to do that. Yeah.
It's great to see the success that they're having with that. And I think they got a fairly new disc out, right?
Yeah.
I saw them in Rochester last year sometime, maybe. It's probably almost a year ago now. Time flies.
So, and then like the current drummer now is Trevor Lake?
Yes, Trevor Lake. Yeah. Probably have to go back a bit to when Greg also joined Low Straitjackets. It's probably about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. He and Jason were both in that band for a while before Jason left to play with J.D. McPherson. He was with him for, 4 or 5 years or something. Something like that.
I think so, yeah.
And had some success with that. It was he was finally able to appear on TV without his mask on. Yeah, so Jason had left the High Risers, and Greg was playing with Low Straitjackets. They were getting fairly busy. I'm trying to remember exactly when Low Straitjackets started working with Nick Lowe, but when that happened, their schedule got even busier, which was great for them. But then we didn't do anything for a while. And then Trevor approached me at Lux Lounge one night and said that he wanted to, audition for the band. And he wasn't the first drummer that had suggested that they try out. We didn't want to put an ad out and then have 100 people show up. And, well, I'm exaggerating, but
maybe 75.
Yeah, but then feelings get hurt. It's like, why didn't you choose me? So. But when I met Trevor, I knew that he might be right for the position. And I was right. We really love the way he plays drums, and he also sings and writes. He's got another band. He'd already had the Televisionaries going for a few years by the time he started with the High Risers. And that band's kept going, and they've been quite successful also.
Yeah.
Had a great run of shows in Spain earlier this year. Played at the Rock and Race Festival, and really great to see their success too. And they've been backing a guy named Les Green. That's coming out pretty soon, Les Green with the Televisionaries. So okay. Les is based out of Key West, Florida, and is in a band. They were called Patrick and the Swayzes for a while. Now it's just the Swayzes, I believe. But Les Green sang in the Elvis movie, the most recent one that everyone's been talking about. He sings the Little Richard part. I played with Les too, and he's a real dynamo. He's not only a great singer, but he dances like wildfire. You just have to see it. There are videos of him, from the Rock and Race Festival and probably Ameripolitan.
Yeah, I did. I watched the video
on the stage and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where I remember that name from. Yeah. And James had talked about him before too, but for whatever reason today it just didn't register. I was like,
okay. Yeah.
Until later, delayed reaction.
Les Green, that's the name.
Yeah.
Remember that name.
Yeah, exactly. You've kind of traveled all over with the High Risers and, probably other times too. But is there a certain person that you have met, maybe that you've been starstruck by?
I can remember one incident where I could not speak. First time I met him was being a Pat Metheny fan when I was in high school. I saw him play live in 1979. I was still in high school, probably a junior in high school. So then after high school, I was going to Berklee College of Music, and my girlfriend at the time was going to Brown University in Providence, and Pat Metheny Group was playing there. And maybe a few days before their show there, he did an interview on the Brown radio station, and Callie, my girlfriend, went down to the station and met him and talked to him, and she, was not starstruck at all, of course. She's just an enthusiastic person. But I think it was the following night or 2 nights after that, he played at Brandeis University outside of Boston, and we went. And before the show, he wasn't that he wasn't like this huge star like he is now, but he was fairly well known in jazz circles, but still relaxed enough so that he could walk by this line of people waiting to see him to get back to the dressing room. But she saw him, said, "Pat," and so he came over and said hi, and I could not believe I was meeting.
And you just looked at him and couldn't say anything.
Yep, just kind of like I am now.
Yeah.
Like. But then I met him a couple times after that, and he was really cool and talked for quite a while. After that, so this band, The Essentials, in 1988, we had developed in the maybe year or two preceding this recording session, had developed a working relationship with a guy named Pee Wee Ellis, tenor saxophone player, who was James Brown's band leader from 1965 to 1969. And then he also worked with Van Morrison in the early 80s. He was in Rochester. He had lived here as a teenager, and then, before he played with James Brown, and his mother was still here, and I think he came back to be with her for a while. But while he was here, we somehow found out, Greg actually found out that he was here in town and called him and asked him if he wanted to play with our band. And he came down and played with us and decided, Greg's this huge James Brown fan, and we were already playing James Brown tunes. Pee Wee came down to play with us, and he liked what he heard. And for, I want to say a couple of years or so, maybe a little more, he played at almost every local show we did. He came and sat in with us. So we had also developed a friendship with the guy named Bill Doggett, who did the song Honky Tonk, which was a huge hit in, I think, 1959. You would recognize it. It's Bill Doggett was an organist who started his career in the 1920s. In the 1930s, he was leading a band which included Lucky Millinder, and eventually he sold his band to Lucky Millinder. It became the Lucky Millinder Band. Bill had a gig playing with Louis Jordan for a few years, and I think this was all on piano still. Eventually he switched to organ and then made some masterpieces, R&B recordings at King Records. I think most of them were recorded in Cincinnati. So the song Honky Tonk was this huge instrumental hit. Anyway, Bill, at the time in the 80s, was playing hotel lounges and stuff, and we would go to see him frequently and talk to him. Greg and this friend, Marty Duda, had the idea to do a recording session with some of these people, and eventually, through Pee Wee Ellis, got quite a few of the alumni from the James Brown Band, including Fred Wesley and Bobby Bird, who was one of the original Famous Flames, Bobby's wife, Vicki Anderson, who had also done quite a few records with the James Brown Band, and she was, with the band as a singer. Bootsy Collins, Clyde Stubblefield, the funky drummer. I don't have my list in front of me, so I know I'm leaving people out. They realized that they had both worked for King Records, and so why not make this thing, like a King Records related thing. They realized that also on King Records was Hank Ballard, who wrote The Twist, and he was still around. So I believe it was Marty that called Hank Ballard and got him to be on this recording with us. So it was really a magical day for all of us to be there. And it was hard not to be a little starstruck, but, we were there trying to be, working together also. I mean, the Essentials were kind of the host band for this. The King All-Stars is what the record came out as eventually. So that was another kind of starstruck moment, to be around all our heroes and be working with them. It's a real rush.
I imagine that if I ever have the chance to meet Jackson Browne, I'll probably be like you were and just not be able to talk.
Hamina. Oh, my girlfriend in high school and early college years, she was a huge fan. We went to see him when Running on Empty came out in the late 70s, I think. Had the whole band with him. Russ Kunkel on drums, Lee Sklar on bass, David Lindley was there. It was great. Great performance. Bonnie Bramlin on vocals. I had mentioned Kaiser George before.
Yeah.
In addition to the recording that we did with Eddie Angel, I think it was either the following year or the year after that, we also made a CD with Kaiser George, and it ended up being called Transatlantic Dynamite. And we did quite a few shows to support that also, and by that time we also had the Eddie Angel disc that we had recorded, so we did some tours where it was the High Risers, and then we would play with both Eddie and with George doing things from their individual discs that they had done with us. And it was a great show that I can remember some of the shows we'd get, because Eddie had a really good following, not just him. I mean, we all did, but especially him. We'd get in the Washington, D.C. area or in the Northeast, and things would just get a bit out of control sometimes. There was this one place in Philadelphia called the Blue Comet, and I remember this night very clearly, relatively speaking. We had, the High Risers and Kaiser George and Eddie Angel. This place, the Blue Comet, I don't know, probably about maybe 100 people or so. I think they probably were over their legal limit that night. I just remember along each side there were these booths, like in a diner, because it was it was a restaurant too. They served food there during the day. So there were people standing up. It seemed like there were people, like the whole floor was packed, and then there were people coming up the walls. It was so hot and steamy in there. It was really cold outside. The walls were dripping because of the condensation. We did, the show at High Risers start, and Kaiser George and Eddie comes out, and things are getting really wild. And the owner of the Blue Comet had this routine that he would do on these wild nights at times where you had to know it was coming, too. He would breathe fire, like right in front of the band. And the stage was only about, probably less than a foot high. So he'd be like 2 feet away from us doing this thing that was like, Gene Simmons of Kiss would do it in a place that's, holding 30,000 people or something. But he's doing it in a small place. It would be really scary sometimes. I heard he stopped doing that at some point, but just would lend an air of really like anything could happen. Anyway, as far as I know, no one ever got hurt, although I saw a couple close calls.
Nobody lost any eyebrows or anything?
No, but it was, it was after that thing with the band Great White, where, like the pyrotechnics had caused a riot in the place, and I think it was Rhode Island or something. Yeah. People actually lost their lives or something. It was like right after that. So it's a little unsettling. But
yeah.
You have to go with the flow when, you go to do a show. You can pick the place and the time, but other than that, whatever happens is kind of out of your, it's in your control to the extent that you go to do your job and do it well and entertain people. And that's really what it's all about, I guess.
Now, from the band stuff to solo stuff, let's get into your solo stuff.
Okay, yeah.
May 7th, 2021, the single Mr. Happy was released on High Tide Records.
That one I recorded here at home in my basement on my laptop computer on GarageBand. I had some experience working with GarageBand and doing home recordings with Greg Townson, doing Greg Townson's solo records. I think he's put out 4, 5, I can't quite remember, but all of them I've been involved with, and we've done them at his house on his laptop. So I'd had a bit of experience with that in March of 2020. The pandemic started, and we were all kind of locked down in our homes. I didn't even have a laptop at that point, but I got one fairly quickly because we figured out that if I had one and I could record tracks at home and then send files to Greg, and we could still record. We actually did a whole other record of his that way, going back and forth, trading tracks where I would do bass parts here. But anyway, you asked about mine. So I had that experience, and I got a laptop and started recording at home. And that song, Mr. Happy, they were, of course, not happy times for most of us during that part of 2020, especially like when it first started. We were kind of wondering what was going to happen. And I was in my bathroom shaving one morning, and I had this melody, and I just whistled it into my phone. It's something I do from time to time on my voice memos on my phone. It's a really handy tool to have, to be able to just pull that out and record things. And I whistled that melody into my phone, and I didn't do anything with it right away, but probably a few months later, I was in the basement, and I had already recorded a couple of things that I had written on my own, recorded on my own in this new setup, and I started playing that on the guitar, and that was my next recording that I did on my laptop. The title probably came after the song. You know, after it was recorded. I was thinking, what do I call this? And it just sounded happy and something that I was trying to put forth. There was a lot of sad news coming on at the time. People weren't getting along with each other, not that they are now.
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't think they still are.
Right, yeah.
Ongoing issue.
Yeah, I mean, not that every song has to be a happy song, but in general, I think, as far as my approach to entertaining people, we play in the high risers mostly, I've done a few small theaters and festivals and things like that, but mostly clubs, or you can see everybody.
Yeah.
And they're right there, almost face to face at times. We like making people happy. That's kind of where the name the high risers came from, really. We wanted to be uplifting for people, lift people out of the doldrums of everyday life. It's starting to sound like Spinal Tap. They're dreary little wives.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, by the way, I'm really excited about the new Spinal Tap movie they're making.
Yeah, I saw you posted. Was it you that posted something?
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
One of the outtakes from the first movie.
Yeah. It said you and Greg were cracking up over it.
Yeah, he had never seen it before, and I have the DVD, so it's got a ton of footage that never came out in the original release. There actually may be more time-wise of outtakes than there was the movie.
Yeah, that's one I need to add to my watch list. I'm sure James has seen it. He's seen way more than I have. I'm just like...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I haven't seen that either, so I'm like Greg was.
Well, he had seen the first movie, but just not the outtakes.
Got you.
Yeah,
okay.
Actually, Greg was the one who turned me on to This Is Spinal Tap back in, I don't know, must have been 1986 or 7, whenever it first came out. That should be great. Some people are worried about it, but considering that when the first movie came out, the whole premise of the story was what this band was already washed up. I don't see, how they think that, the band's going to be washed up now. What's wrong with that? That's how it's supposed to be.
Like they still are.
Yeah, right. Yeah, nothing's changed. Right? Although they're probably bigger now than they were then.
Yeah.
Like, like the Ramones, their fame just keeps growing.
Yeah.
Yeah, my solo stuff, I've also released a song called Next Summer.
Yeah, that's gotten some attention on Catching a Wave.
Yeah, well, thank you for playing that. I appreciate it. Yeah, that was something I had written years ago, and I had actually done a previous recording on a previous home recording setup that I had that, it's nothing that would be releasable ever. Yeah, I did another version of that in 2020 and released it. High Tide put it out. Really happy about that. And yeah, High Tide's great to work with. Vincent and Magdalena, they're literally mom and pop operation. They're so enthusiastic and energetic and really good at promoting things.
Yeah, they're really great to deal with, like for us.
Yeah. I don't know, exactly. So happy to be associated with them. Besides High Tide, they started a subsidiary label called New Tone.
Yeah.
Which is things that might not stylistically be quite in the High Tide realm. So then they put out my CD called Cerulean Dreams.
I'm glad you said it and not me. I might have said that.
Yeah. So yeah, truthfully, so I'll tell you how that title came about. It really started with this one song by Wayne Shorter called Mahjong that I thought would make a good kind of surf, approaching surf rock. It's a little, it's not traditional surf, obviously, because it's like taking this jazz song and it's, a bit of a fusion, if you will. Yeah. And I did that recording. I had a lot of time on my hands because we were at home. No one was playing out. A lot of people were doing home recording, but I had the idea to do songs from the Blue Note Records catalog, which was music that I had been listening to since I was in my teens. And, my older brother Scott turned me on to a lot of Blue Note records, a lot of them Wayne Shorter, Horace Silver, stuff like that, McCoy Tyner. I did kind of my own versions of a lot of these songs, only with just bass guitar and drums. And it's mostly me playing all three of those on the whole CD. Greg does play guitar on three of the songs, and then my brother Scott plays piano on one. Other than that, it's me.
And one of them that Greg is on, I want to just draw attention to, just because the title. And I think James pointed it out one time. I'm not sure if he's played it on Catching Weight, maybe, but he definitely pointed it out to me. He's like, hey, there's a track on here called Filthy McNasty. Yeah, that's one of the two Horace Silver songs. Yeah, that's one actually we had been playing with The Essentials years ago. We started playing that. My brother, being a big jazz head, thought, it's kind of, blues-based jazz songs that we could do. We did a Charles Mingus song way back then, too. I had always kind of heard, none of that was ever recorded. So I thought it was appropriate. And that was one of the ones that we were able to trade files via the internet. So I sent him the song, and he did his part there. And that's the one where we're trading solos, going back and forth, like for that last part of the guitar solo section. Yeah.
He's on that one, and he's on Mahjong doing a few of the rhythm parts. That was the Wayne Shorter song that I mentioned earlier. And then he's also on Lee Morgan's song called The Sidewinder. And he takes the greatest guitar solo on that, where he just kind of goes wild with the whammy bar. That's one of my favorites on the whole disc, I think. So I wasn't sure what to call the album, and since it was all Blue Note related stuff, I looked up words that were blue, different shades of blue or related to blue, and I came across this word cerulean, and it just sounded appropriate, although it's really cerulean blue. I've been told that the Crayola actually has a color, cerulean blue, which is different than the Blue Note label in the 60s would, a lot of the artwork on the record covers would have this sort of blue tint to them, and that's actually a different kind of blue, but you don't want to get too picky. I thought Cerulean Dreams sounded pretty cool, and it sounded like something kind of vaguely heady, like a Blue Note release would be, and I purposely worked with the people that designed the cover to have it look like a record from that time period. with the blue tint to it and the kind of the smoke coming up from around me. It was a cool experience putting that out. And it's kind of weird putting something out as my first solo album release to be something of all cover songs. But it was just something that happened, and it wasn't premeditated at all. At one point I decided to make it a project, but at first it really wasn't that.
Now, one thing I did tell James that I would ask you, and I know you talked about the Salamanders, and he did want me to let you know that he was listening to Livestock in the Living Room, that album.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah,
yeah.
He had gone on a mission for that.
That's the one we recorded at Springfield with Lou Whitney, Donnie Thompson, And, there are some really fun moments on that record.
Then there was I want to say it was a song, maybe, yes, that has something to do with you. Todd made us late. Why did you make them late?
Well, my brother Scott, who played keyboards and trumpet in the band, he wrote that out of frustration. There may have been some truth that it was based on at one point, that I would... he and I were roommates for a few years in the early 80s. When we would go to band rehearsal, I guess I would be making us late. He wrote a song about it, I guess. I would take my time doing things, and not purposely, but just, it's kind of like Andy in Toy Story, 5 minutes, huh? And I'm easily distracted, I guess. So
I have that same problem.
Yeah. So I'm sure there were more than a few times where I made us late to band rehearsal or a gig or something. I eventually grew to appreciate the value of being on time, and even though I can't say I'm on time all the time now, I've become much better at it. And having kids and having to get them places in time, that helps. With Greg being gone away with Low Straitjackets so much, and we didn't really have another drummer at the time, I had been listening to Bossa Nova music quite a bit over the years. I would actually drive Greg and Jason a bit nutty in the van on these tours we did by playing so much Bossa Nova music. But I decided that I wanted to try to start a band, like learn how to play this music. I was playing stuff like that on guitar a little bit already. I decided I was going to ask my brothers and another friend to start this band. So we called, and it's all cover songs, but it's called the Bossa Nova Bradley Brothers, and we do things just around town, really. So you familiar with Bossa Nova music?
I am.
Okay, yeah. So it's Brazilian, and a lot of the original lyrics are in Portuguese, which I don't speak, but put my nose to the grindstone and learned how to sing quite a few songs in Portuguese. We didn't do anything for a couple of years, or not much, but we're starting to play out again. And it's mostly traditional Brazilian, like João Gilberto and Antonio Carlos Jobim songs. And that's something that's pretty surprising, as far as people that know me from the High Risers might be really surprised about that, I'm interested in that kind of music for one thing, but also have, put this band together. It's been pretty rewarding, and, something that I never thought I'd do, but I just happen to have time to put my energies toward that and focus on that long enough to make it happen. I just wanted to mention that. Okay,
yeah, I'm glad you did. Now I can send a bunch of Bossa Nova music to Greg. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, he does, he likes Bossa Nova.
I'm kidding.
He's been very supportive of it, too. He'll come to see us play and stuff. He wasn't quite crazy about it 20 years ago when we were touring in the van.
Yeah. Well, as he's gotten older, I'm sure he's gotten more used to different styles and sounds. And
oh yeah, I mean, he's got very open ears. When he started doing solo records, and besides, the first couple were all geared toward his songs that he wrote, or vocal songs. But then he put out the instrumental records, Traveling Guitar, more Traveling Guitar. That was kind of like expanding the focus and, encompassing some elements of music from different parts of the world, so anyway.
I'll let you talk about Greg all you want. We're huge fans of Greg.
Yeah, well, me too. I'm one of his biggest fans, I'm sure. He's got some pretty big fans.
We're buddies too, but we're fans first.
Yeah, and it's great to see, and now he's I'll be over at his house working on some recording, and he'll play me a snippet of something. Oh, Nick has this idea for, Nick Lowe. Mm-hmm. Nick has this idea for a song. He's, wondering if I have an idea for, the middle eight, And it's wow, he's, writing songs with Nick Lowe. It's pretty cool. I've met Nick a couple times too, and he's really great, easygoing guy.
I did a show on Nick Lowe and put Greg on it, but
okay.
I haven't met him. I haven't met Nick or Greg. I just think I know Greg. I know Greg from the phone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, you can get to know a person pretty well, I think, through conversation.
Yeah. That and text messages and Messenger, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, just keeping in touch with them. I think James has met him. I've seen him a few times, and so I feel like I know him that way.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
James knows everybody. I know nobody. I'm kidding. I know. I know people.
Well, but yeah, he's the one that gets out there in the field more often.
These days it's both of us. But before we met, he had met a whole bunch of people, and
I see. Okay.
But yeah, now it's us or neither one of us. So.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool. That's great.
Except for today, you're just talking to me, and
Right. Yeah. Well, but he'll hear all this eventually. So.
Yeah, he will.
Yeah.
The Beach Boys or the Everly Brothers?
I'm sorry, the Beach Boys are who?
The Everly Brothers. Do you know who that is?
Oh, yeah. I was hoping you didn't say the Doobie Brothers. Beach Boys or the Everly Brothers? Oh, man. This is starting out tough. I mean, the Everlys were around first. I'm sure an influence on Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. Choose one or the other. I would say if you're asking which one is a bigger influence on me and the one I've tried to emulate more, probably the Beach Boys.
Do you have
I have to choose?
If you have to choose.
Yeah, but the Everlys, via the Beatles and all these Beach Boys, everyone, you can't say you're not influenced by them because you are.
Do you have a favorite song by the Beach Boys?
Well, they're someone I've been listening to so long, and a friend of mine up the street had the Beach Boys' greatest hits when we were growing up. That was one of the first albums we would throw on. Now I would have to say In My Room if I had to choose one.
That's a good one. That's a classic one.
It's a huge hit. They had so many. At the time when I was a kid, I probably would have said Fun, 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 or Little Honda, or, something fast.
Yeah.
But now, more sentimental fool that I am, probably, In My Room, I'd have to say.
Okay, so the Beach Boys or the Doobie Brothers? I'm just kidding. Don't answer that. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you actually knew who Jackson Browne was, so the last person that I talked to didn't even know who he was, and I had to... Try to make myself not hang up.
No, I love a lot of his songs. That bring me back. To those, especially like those first few leading up to Running on Empty, are probably my favorite. Lawyers in Love, maybe not as much, but
like the one that Glenn Fry heard all the time for months on end. Doctor My Eyes.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, that's a good song. Is that on the Pretender, that album? Or no? The first one, right?
Yeah, the first one.
Yeah.
It's Saturate Before Using, but they also call it his self-titled debut album. So.
Okay, right, Saturate Before Using. And then Late for the Sky was in between those two.
Yeah,
right?
It was in 74.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
I know my Jackson Browne history. No.
I know those records pretty well.
Now, we like to talk about a time machine in this household. We like to, think about meeting each other sooner. We met in 2015.
Yeah, I know.
So, like, if we met sooner, all this. So, if you had to pick a time to go back to, a year, decade, an era, what would you pick? Just make sure
and be
you're
the same age.
Yeah, you could be the same age you are now. Just make sure to take your wife with you.
I was wondering if it was either that or if I was going to be the same age that I was then and just go back and do it again. Or
yeah, you could do that either way. Either way you want to do it.
But knowing everything I do now, but no, not knowing. Time-wise, yeah, I mean the 60s. My dad passed in 67, and I would love to see him again, so I guess. And it's hard to say if I would rather do it as an adult or as a child. That's something I've thought about frequently. People wish they could go back and do it all again, but there are a lot of things I really don't want to have to live through again, so.
Yeah.
It's a tough one,
Yeah. Now, speaking of tough, this is the one that people say is the toughest question, and It's one of our favorites, though, and not because it's tough, just because it's music related. If you could have 3 to 5 albums with you on a desert island, which 3 to 5 albums would you take with you?
Okay, well, yeah, this has crossed my mind over the years. Everyone has their desert island records. So the first couple that I had picked out years ago, The Ventures in Space, Mickey Baker, The Wildest Guitar. Do you know that one?
I don't, but I'm going to look up a bunch of stuff after I talk to you.
Yeah, Mickey Baker was mostly a studio guitarist. You've heard us playing on a lot of rock and roll hits, mostly 50s and 60s. And, Love is Strange, Mickey and Sylvia.
Yeah.
That was Mickey Baker.
Okay.
Which probably not long after that, he moved to Europe and lived there for the rest of his life. But this one record he had put out in the early 60s on Atlantic Records called The Wildest Guitar. That's all instrumental and a ton of slapback echo, like the tape echo thing that was popular. It's just great sound. Can't go anywhere without a Beatles record, and I'd have to say my favorite one of theirs would be Hard Day's Night. So that's 3. Beach Boys, that's a tough one. Can't say which Beach Boys record.
The best of.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Okay, Endless Summer, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Good choice, right? That was a good collection, Endless Summer. That double album came out in the late 70s or something. Okay, so that's 4. Oh, no. Can I take 6?
Yeah, I'll let you do it.
Because I've been listening to so much Bossa Nova music. I have a favorite Antonio Carlos Jobim record called The Wonderful World of Antonio Carlos Jobim. It's actually the record I was listening to when I decided I wanted to form a band, Bossa Nova group. And my other Bossa Nova hero, this guy João Gilberto, who guitarist, vocalist, and composer, and he basically invented the style. His first album is just called João Gilberto. Those would be 6.
Okay.
I'm thinking of all this stuff I'm leaving out, but different music for different moods.
Anything coming up for either you solo-wise, or you with the High Risers, or you with...
Well, recently the High Risers played a live show for the first time in just over 3 years.
Yeah.
3 years and a few months. We just thought we'd do that one, see how it went before we made any more plans. But I think it went really well. And in fact, I know it went really well. We had a great crowd. The audience response was even better. I mean, it was just really surprising and heartwarming. So we're talking about doing more of that. Nothing in writing yet, but we're hoping to do more before not too long. Maybe a few months, maybe closer to the end of the year. Who knows? We are confirmed. There's an event in New Jersey in September that I'm sorry I don't have written down. It might be a festival, but I'm not sure. But we are playing there So there's definitely, things, there are things in the works for the high risers. We're also talking about doing some more recording and getting something out and possibly getting back to Spain next year. There's this festival called Rock and Race, which I'm really hoping we can play. They're having their 30-year anniversary. It's probably the only festival, one big rock and roll festival in Spain that we haven't played at, so I'd really love to do that, and that would be next February. As far as me locally, the Bossa Nova group called the Bossa Nova Bradley Brothers. We have some things lined up. One of the movie theaters that shows like art house type films that has been around for quite a long time is called the Little Theater, and they have a cafe there that has live music, so we play at the Little Theater Cafe quite frequently, and just trying to get some other gigs. Singing Bossa Nova in Portuguese is not exactly a huge sell here in Rochester, the frozen north, but I think it could be if we just get a recording done, which actually in 2020 I had planned on taking the band into the studio right around then, and then things kind of broke down for a while, so I'm hoping we can actually do that sometime, maybe in the next few months. We'll do some recording, put out a record. Who knows?
That'll be good.
Yeah, and I'm still, working on other songs too, and hopefully get someone to put them out. Hopefully get some airplay by nice people like you.
We'll always play it.
Well, thank you, Beth. I really appreciate that.
Sorry, we have an ambulance going by.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just waiting on it to die out.
Sure, yeah.
Not the person in the ambulance, but...
Yeah, right, yeah. Hopefully they won't.
Todd, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you, Beth. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.